What's up, friends? Welcome into this members Q&A, one of my favorite 45 minutes to an hour every single week. Always appreciate you guys a ton. You are, as I always say, the lifeblood of the Pack-A-Day podcast, and I would not be here if it weren't for you guys. So thank you so much for making this what it is. And I always love your super well thought out and unique and detailed questions every single week. It makes it really, really fun to sort of deep dive into some of these things and go through everything. So I'm looking forward to another set of what I'm sure will be amazing questions. As I mentioned, probably about 45 minutes to an hour today, as we'll get through as many questions as we possibly can per usual. And we'll kind of go from there. So like I said, very much looking forward to it. And thank you for making this what it is every single week. Always a pleasure. All right, King Kermit 1, crashing after work now, so probably going to miss the stream. Hope it's a good one. It will be, King Kermit. My question is, do you think there's any more clarity to how the Packers plan on filling this roster out over the last couple weeks? 9 offensive linemen instead of 10 offensive linemen, for example, and who's on the outside of the roster right now? Here's where I'm at right now with this, and this is kind of what it ultimately boils down to every single year, is who would you lose sleep over if you released and they got claimed? All right. So let's kind of go through this because I know there's a lot of questions already about the 53-man roster, who's going to make it, who's not going to make it. And here's where I'm at. All right. At quarterback, clearly Jordan Love's not going anywhere. Would you lose sleep if you lost Sean Clifford? To me, the answer would be no. If they release Sean Clifford and some other team claims him, I don't think anyone's going to be like, oh, well, there goes Sean Clifford. He's going to go tear it up for the Bengals or something. Is anyone going to lose sleep over it? Probably not. Michael Pratt, maybe, right? I think there's enough upside and intrigue there where you're like, if you release him, you kind of found him as a 7th round pick. He fell farther than he should have in the draft, made some really nice plays, looks like he's got a rocket of an arm, and you could see him developing. I would lose a little sleep over that, being like, did they maybe just lose a really nice developmental quarterback that they can groom over the course of these next couple of years? So that's where I'm at with the quarterback spot. I would lose a lot more sleep if they lost Michael Pratt than I would if they lost Sean Clifford. At running back, we know Jacobs isn't going anywhere. Marshawn Lloyd, maybe he starts on IR, maybe he starts on the 53, but clearly he's not going anywhere. The rest, am I honestly losing any sleep over A.J. Dillon, Emmanuel Wilson, Jarvion Howard, Nate McCrary, Ellis Merriweather? I'm not. This is look at what the Broncos did, by the way, in the last game. I talked about this in the pregame show. P. Ryan didn't even play, I don't think, for the Broncos, but Javonte Williams looked great. Then Jaleel McLaughlin came in and burst a great big run. Audric Estieme is their 5th round pick, and he's looked good so far. Blake Watson's been a really intriguing undrafted free agent who barely even got in the game for them. And Tyler Batty looked great against Green Bay. And then they still have Samaje Perine. Like, they got 6. Like, you can find guys like A.J. Dillon and Emmanuel Wilson that will be cut or are available at almost any time of this, this season. Like, you can find those guys. So would it make sense to keep Dillon? Sure. Would I be absolutely fine if they kept Emmanuel Wilson? Yes. Am I going to lose sleep if they lose either of those guys? No, absolutely not. So Lloyd, Jacobs, and then keep whatever other one you want. And I think ultimately at the end of the day that it's fine. Wide receiver, I would say there's 5. Reed, Dobbs, Watson, Wicks, Heath, and Melton. Wicks and Melton. Heath and Dubose. And anyone else, Hicks, Wayne. I don't think anyone else is going to lose, again, any sleep over losing those guys. Now, does Dubose show some upside? Yes. Is Malik Heath a consistent contributor? Yes. Do I think that there are wide receivers like those 2 guys all around the NFL? I do. Maybe a little bit more upside there for Dubose. And if you want to put him in that list of like, I really don't want to lose him, I could kind of see it, but go back and watch this game. Really nice tackle on special teams, had a really nice block on an Emmanuel Wilson run, but really struggled to get open with any consistency against Broncos backups, corners. It is not going to affect them if they lose Malik Heath or Grant Dubose. It's just not going to. Keep whichever one you like, but I don't think it really changes the DNA of this roster in any major way. Offensive line, Rasheed Walker, Jenkins, Myers, Morgan, Zach Tom, Jacob Monk, Sean Ryan. Like, those are the 7. I would put Travis Glover on there just based off of what I saw in this last game. To me, there's enough there where 6th round pick, enough upside. I wouldn't necessarily want to lose him. Anyone else, you want to make any formation of Dillard, Telfort, I would say not Royce Newman at this point. I think you're doing yourself more harm than good by keeping Royce Newman, but you get my point. If you want to mix and match any of the other ones, but You can lose any of those guys, Caleb Jones, Luke Tenuta, Lacita Smith, and you're not going to worry about it because, again, you can sort of just find guys like that through the course of the NFL. Defensive line, Rashawn Gary, we didn't do tight end. Musgrave and Kraft are probably your main ones at tight end. I would keep Ben Sims too. I think there's enough there as well. But Tyler Davis, Joel Wilson, Messiah Swinson, don't think there's going to be any lost sleep over those. Defensive end, Preston Smith, LVN, Enigbare, Rashawn Gary. If you want to put a Brenton Cox on that list, okay. I wouldn't. Again, I think you can find guys like that. Defensive tackle, Slayton Clark, Wyatt Brooks. I would put Wooden on there as well. I wouldn't put anyone else on that list. Linebacker, really honestly, Walker, McDuffie, Cooper, and Hopper is probably it. I like Eric Wilson, and he's almost assuredly going to make the team. But again, I don't think you're going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe they lost Eric Wilson. Like, you'll be fine. You will move on, and somebody else will take that spot. Same thing with Christian Welch or anyone else. Corner, Stokes, Valentine, Nixon, Jair. And I would say definitely Kalen King too, because of some of the upside that he has shown. Outside of that, you're not going to worry about anything. Safety, McKinney, Bullard, Evan Williams, Anthony Johnson Jr. And I would put Kitano Ladapo on there as well. And then punter, Daniel Whalen. And that's it. Like, those are the guys. Like, make sure you don't lose any of those guys that I just named. And I would put Michael Pratt. I would put Kalen King. I would put Travis Glover on that list. But everyone else, any of these fringe roster guys, Malik Heath, Emmanuel Wilson, Grant Dubose, Joel Wilson, Tyler Davis, Brenton Cox, maybe Brenton Cox you put on the list, but even that one's a struggle for me. I just don't think it's really going to move the needle one way or the other. The difference between them and anyone else that you can sort of find at any given moment, extremely, extremely minimal. And a lot of those guys, you're probably just going to get back on the practice squad anyway. Remember that like 30-ish guys maybe get claimed after a cut down where, thousands of guys, 1,000 guys plus get cut in a very short period of time. What is it? So we've got, I did this math the other day, so my apologies for doing it again, but you've got a 91-man roster minus 53 times 32, 1,216 guys. There's maybe a few less on some teams because they don't have the international pathway program or whatever, but 1,200 guys are going to get cut and maybe 30 of them are going to get claimed. Like the Green Bay probably has one, maybe, but just make sure it's not one of those guys that you really would lose sleep over. And I just don't think there's honestly all that many. I think they have good depth, but they're going to get a lot of these guys back, and it matches a lot of the other depth across the NFL, as we saw against the Broncos this past week. It wasn't like once the Broncos backups were in, Green Bay's backups were just night and day better than everyone else. There's a lot of guys like that throughout the league. So I wouldn't be too concerned with anyone that's not one of those main guys on the roster. Churn any of those bottom 10, and you're probably the exact same football team. All right, what wide receiver is the most risky to leave on the practice squad? I would say Bo Melton. We kind of just discussed this a little bit. I'm not super concerned about Dubose. I'm not super concerned about Malik Heath. Yeah, would it be a bummer if maybe you lost one of those guys and you didn't get him back on the practice squad? Yeah, it would be a little bit of a bummer. Should you be worried about it? No. Do I think you can find those guys? Absolutely. So I would personally kind of lean a little bit more towards Malik Heath at the moment, but I could understand both of those. But I honestly think they get Dubose and Malik Heath back on the practice squad if they wanted to. I really do. Omer, good to see you. If the Packers keep Travis Glover, probably the weakest rookie in camp of this 2024 draft class, as I'd expect, knowing Goot hates to cut his draft picks, then that would likely mean only one more tackle. Maybe. I will say I really like Travis Glover in this last game, though. I don't think he showed as the worst draft pick in this class, quite honestly. I actually thought he had a better game than Kitano Ladapo did, and Oladapo showed some nice things. He probably had a better day than Michael Pratt, probably had a better day than Kalen King in this last game. He actually performed well. So I think there's still a lot of upside there. I think you can probably have a world where you can keep like a Dillard, a Glover, and like a Kadeem Telford. I think you can. Telford's played a little bit of guard in OTAs and minicamp, so it's not completely unthinkable, but you probably need to do a little bit of roster gymnastics to kind of make something like that work. So my question is, if Glover is one of the tackles, Green Bay's Dillard going to be the other? Or do you think Jones, Telford, or Tenuta could still win that role over Dillard? I think they could, but as I just mentioned, I think you could end up with a situation where Glover, Dillard, and Telford are all on the roster. In fact, I think if I were to put together a 53 right now, I think I would have Dillard, Telford, and Glover all on the roster. So let's play that out. So Walker, Jenkins, Myers, Morgan, Tom, Sean Ryan, Jacob Monk, Kadeem Telford, Andre Dillard, and Travis Glover. That's 10. Yeah, that's how I would do it right now. Those would be my 10. Do you think that the Packers keep both Wilson and Dillon? Seems so if Lloyd is on IR to start 2024. And do you think Davis and Sims both make the team, or do you think Green Bay only keeps 3 tight ends? I think Davis and Sims both make it, although Davis cannot afford another game like he had last week. That was a really abysmal performance by him. And I do think if Lloyd starts on IR, remember, you can put 2 guys on IR to bring back before cutdowns now. If that does happen, I do think Dillon and Wilson will both make the team. If Lloyd is ready to go or starts practicing this week, then I think it becomes a much bigger question. And I think Emmanuel Wilson might still have some work to do to make the 53-man roster. Last question, defensive end, Cox or Mosby, Wooden or Ford, King versus Rochelle, Oladapo versus Anderson. Do you see any of the latter beating the first player in any of those competitions? I think Mosby can make it, but I would put Cox over him right now. I think Wooden over Ford is a gimme. I don't see Jonathan Ford making this roster. King versus Rochelle. I think King's going to make it. I think Rochelle versus Ballantyne is more the argument here. I would still go with Ballantyne. I do like Rochelle, though. I'm very hopeful that if they do release him, they can get him back on the practice squad. Oladapo versus Anderson. I think Oladapo makes that. Anderson would have to, I think, make it as a 6 safety at this point. So yeah, that's where I would kind of be with all of those. Kevin, do you think Mosby or Cox makes the 53? Mosby shows some juice and can play some special teams. Just kind of talked about that. I think there is an argument to be made for a 5th defensive end. I think there's an argument to be made for Mosby because exactly what you said. He does have more special teams value than Brenton Cox does. And he can even, in the past, at least, I don't know how much they really would plan on doing this, but he has played some off-ball linebacker as well. So there's a little bit more versatility, a little bit more that he can do for you there. But I do think Brenton Cox is a little bit better of a player, but he hasn't separated himself by a ton from Mosby. So if they do keep a 5th defensive end, it will very much be between Cox and Mosby. Here's how I would think of this as a GM, though, right? And just like kind of think through this with me for a second. Gary, Enigbare, Preston Smith, and LVN are going to play all of your defensive end snaps, right? There's no actual snaps available for Brenton Cox or Aaron Mosby unless there's an injury, right? We'll get to that in a second. If there were an injury in a game and you only had the 4, quite frankly, you could probably get away with 3. All right. There's probably 60 snaps a game times 120 divided by 3 guys. That would be 40 snaps per player, right? And Gary and Preston are going to play more than that. So you can easily get away with just 3 of those guys and still feel fine. Not to mention, in a pinch, Carl Brooks can play on the edge. Colby Wooden can play on the edge. I even think Quay Walker and Edgerrin Cooper can play a little on the edge if you absolutely needed them to. Like, you have guys on the roster that can fill in even in some emergency type situations, right? And if we are talking about should they go with Brenton Cox or Aaron Mosby, which one should make it? Who's better? There's some advantages for Mosby because he can play special teams and maybe a couple different positions, and he showed some juice. As a GM, here's how I think of it. I don't need either of those guys on my active roster. It would be great to have them if there were injuries so I could call them up to the team. But what if they get claimed by another team? Here's the thing. There are 2 of them. I feel great if I can just get one of those guys back on the practice squad. I don't necessarily need both. They're already the 5th guy at a position I really don't need a 5th guy at. So if I cut Brenton Cox and Aaron Mosby, quite frankly, I feel pretty confident I'm going to get both of those guys back on the practice squad. Even if one of them gets claimed, the odds that both of them get claimed are extremely thin. And like I said, I think I think the most likely outcome is that both Cox and Mosby make it to the practice squad. And even if one of them doesn't, there's like a 99.9% chance the other does. And the extreme likely or least likely outcome is that both of them were to get claimed. And if they would, then you'd have to find yourself probably somebody to put on the practice squad to take their spot. But again, I don't think that you're super concerned about it. And I think the odds of that are insanely slim. So I feel like I can go stronger at a different position, cut both of those guys, at least at worst, get one of them back on the practice squad. Don't need them during the season anyway, unless there's an injury. And if there's an injury, then I can call whoever is remaining up, or whichever of the 2, hopefully, if both of them come back, that I want to call up at that point. So that's kind of, I think, how I would handle that 5th defensive end position. More likely cut Clifford or Carlson, or obviously neither. Oh, that is a tough one. I think they want to keep both. I think they really would like to keep both. I mean, I could easily see a world in which both of them are on the roster. I can easily see a world in which both of them are not. Neither of them have done enough to keep their spot, but nobody has done any better job of beating them out. So the better odds of being cut, I'll say Carlson, I guess, because I mean, he's at 80% and Joseph's been slightly better, but not by much, by like one kick. And there's a lot of other kickers out there. So I'll say Carlson, but I think both of them can, but I could see both of them being back too. That's a difficult question. That's a good one. Oh, yes. Do you see Donovan Jennings having a chance to make it as guard if Royce, the air blocking specialist Newman, finally gets cut as he should have 2 years ago? I don't see a world in which Donovan Jennings can make the 53 at this point. Just hasn't had any time. He's going to do some individuals. Maybe he can get in the game this week. He's going to have to absolutely tear it up to get in that conversation. If he gets in the game, and that's not a guarantee, I just think he's probably a release and a practice squad guy to begin with. And I don't think there's anyone that's going to claim him. Especially with no tape on file. So he's probably just ends up back on the practice squad. Also, any chance late guys, Morton, Allen, have any chance to crack the team? I would say no, but those guys are fighting for practice squad spots. I think guys like a Jalen Wayne, guys like Morton, Allen, McCrary, they know that their odds of making the 53 coming in at this point are almost none, but they'll fight tooth and nail to show that they are capable of making a practice squad. And there's 16 guys, not including Kenneth Odumegwu, who makes it as the 17th, that will make that team out of what? So 90 minus 53, 37. So 16 of the 37 will end up back in all likelihood on the practice squad. Maybe they grab a guy from a different team, but 16 out of 37 guys will have a chance to make that practice squad. And that's what those guys are fighting for. Rob, non-football related, what's a go-to hidden gem in or around the Green Bay area to eat at? I love Play Bistro. Love Chives. I love Rustique for pizza. Hinterland right across from Lambeau Field. Let's see, what else? Those are probably some of my favorite go-tos. If you're looking for something a little bit more casual, I mean, you always have Kroll's across the street, which is just more of like the, bar food, but it's, the iconic Kroll's right across from Lambeau. Yeah, those would be probably top ahead of things that I really enjoy around the area. Any trade pieces we can dangle to other teams for offensive line depth? Definitely not comfortable outside of Ryan and Monk for depth. I wouldn't even necessarily be comfortable with Ryan, especially based on this Monk based on this last game, and he's still a rookie. But here's the thing. Nobody's trading away offensive line depth. Nobody is trading away offensive line depth. You might be able, like when Green Bay traded Cole Van Lannon, who was a 7th round pick that needed a lot of development, you might be able to pry a guy like that. But nobody's trading away legitimate offensive line depth. Every team wants 10 good offensive linemen, and every team's got maybe 5 or 6, maybe 7, 8 if they're very lucky. And if they have a 9th or a 10th, they're not going to part with it. This is why you never see an offensive lineman traded around the trade deadline. Every once in a great while, if there's a holdout situation like a Laramie Tunsil or a Trent Williams, you will see it, but it is extremely, extremely rare to see offensive linemen, like good offensive linemen, traded because every team needs them and no team can get enough of them. Good day, Rob. Good to see you, sir. Hope all is well, my friend. Love that. Love the community here. Also, Welsh and Rochelle gaining real traction. I would agree. I think both of them are very much in the conversation right now. And this is the hard part, right? If we look at some of these fringe guys, especially on defense. We talked about Aaron Mosby. We talked about Christian Welch, Robert Rochelle, Zane Anderson. Like these type of guys are core special teams guys. And you could release them all. You could release Anderson and Rochelle and, the linebacker, Christian Welch, Aaron Mosby, etc. You could release all those guys. But those are going to be a lot of your special teamers. You can't call all of them up from the practice squad. So this is going to go a long way in determining, who ultimately makes this team is some of those special teams battles. The other thing I'll say too is like you could end up in a situation where Edgerrin Cooper starts on IR. That could be a possibility. I hope it's not. But if that is a possibility, that could get Christian Welch on the roster. So yeah, they're going to have some very difficult decisions. And a lot of those fringe guys are the special teams guys. And they're going to need some of those guys to be good on special teams. So that's kind of a little bit of a conundrum there with all of those roster bubble guys, all being some of the guys that are core special teamers. Andy, come next Tuesday and the dust settles on cutdowns. How do you see the quarterback room and kicker position looking? Man, I don't know. I'll say right now, Love, Clifford, Pratt, Carlson. I think that's probably what it looks like. But man, if you told me it was just Love and Pratt, if you told me it was Love and they traded for a Taylor Heineke and then Pratt, and it was a completely new kicker like a Cade York or an Austin Seibert, I honestly almost believe anything you told me at this point. I know Love's going to be there. I really think Pratt's going to be there. Like, obviously, Love is 100%. I think Pratt's about a 75%. I think Clifford's a 50-50. I think Carlson's a 50-50. I think Greg Joseph's like a 25% maybe. And then I think, I don't think Alex Hale has any chance of making the roster. I think any kicker not on the roster is probably at like 25%. And maybe it's like 40% Carlson, 20% Joseph, 40% different kicker. But I'll say right now, Clifford, Pratt, Love, and then Carlson. But I have no confidence one way or the other with Carlson, Joseph, or Clifford at this point. Don't know how Andy does all he does. Practice right after the show. I don't think the man ever stops working. One thing's for sure, he's a master of multitasking. How he answers all the questions is amazing. Omar, appreciate that, and appreciate all your smart questions on all of these. It makes it very, very fun. It's the lucky hat, Omar. It is. That's actually the superpower, is the Live Lucky hat. Judy, good to see you. Has anyone noticed J-Love bulking up? Reminds me of Giannis. I wouldn't quite go that far. He does look a little bit stronger. That deep ball looks a little bit better, but I wouldn't go quite to the Giannis. Giannis is yoked beyond yoked, but definitely looks like Love's put on some, my favorite saying, some functional strength in the offseason. What's the biggest reason why Royce Newman has gotten worse since his rookie year? Is it talent, competition, or a mental thing? I wish I had an answer, and I'm sure the Packers wish they had an answer as well, Richard. I think some guys just don't progress the way that you would hope. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't care all that much. So like, some guys just don't really care. Like, they're just trying to make it by there. It's kind of like you're in college and you're just trying to get a degree and get the hell out of there and move on. Like, some guys are just trying to collect as many paychecks as they can, and then they want to be done. And it is what it is. I'm not saying that's Royce. I have no idea. It seems like he works hard, and some guys just don't have it. And it's unfortunate because I thought, and again, I'll say this kind of like I said on today's show, it's not like Royce was good his first year, but he started 1,000 snaps on a really great offense, and it wasn't like massively noticeable. It was fine, mostly fine. But you will take mostly fine as like a 7th, 8th, 9th guy on your offensive line. Yosh Nijman as a swing tackle was like mostly fine. It wasn't good. He was mostly fine. Like, you will take mostly fine along the offensive line as a depth piece far more often than not. But he's not mostly fine anymore. He's been bad. And I wish I had a reason for it. I don't know if he just hasn't put on strength the way he's needed to. I don't know if sometimes you put on strength and it takes, like, one of his things that he was really good at coming out of college was getting out of his stance super quick, exploding out of it and getting to his spot. I don't know if maybe putting on weight has allowed him or, not allowed him to get to his spots as well. I don't know. I wish I had a better answer for you, but it's been disappointing for a 4th round pick. And he's just never developed. And we've seen that with a lot of different guys, unfortunately, from guys like DJ Williams, Quentin Rollins, Demarius Randall. We could go on and on, right? There are a plethora of players who just never took a step, and in fact took steps back through the course of their career. Josh Jackson, Josh Jones. We can go on and on. It just happens with some guys. And unfortunately, Royce Newman has been one of those guys. Mr. Packer in the house, ready to share some more of his extensive Packers knowledge. August 27th, cut downs a week from today. Let's go. Dan Verdick, Andy, have you ever thought of changing this to the Pack an Hour podcast? I have not. I think Pack a Day is staying, but no Pack an Hour. Why will the Packers not sign a legit backup like Tannehill? Let's talk about this. This is a fun conversation. So Green Bay has the money to go out and get a Ryan Tannehill, right? Let's start with the preface that Ryan Tannehill wants $8 to $10 million per year on a 1-year deal. And let's say that he is open to being a backup. If I'm Ryan Tannehill, I'm waiting for some quarterback to explode somewhere on a competitive team so that I can go be the starter for them. If there's a big time team that's competing, that's 6-2, and their quarterback goes down for the year, that's the team that's going to call Ryan Tannehill, and that's probably where he's going to go, and that's probably when he's going to sign. But let's assume for this exercise that he wants about 8 to 10 mil on a 1-year deal, which is what I guess, let's just say it's 7 to 8 million. All right. 7 to 8 million, but I think it could be more on a 1-year deal. And he's willing to be the backup to Jordan Love. Let's say that that's the case, which I don't know, by the way, if that would be the case. He might just say, no, I'm going to wait till a starting job opens. If that is the case, if you're Green Bay, do you want to spend $8 million on a quarterback who, if everything goes correctly, would never see the field? Like, that is a pretty decent chunk of money for a resource that you might never use. And you could also get into the situation where Tannehill might still be available if Jordan did suffer something where it's going to keep him out for 10 to 12 weeks or something. That might be the situation where then you go and sign Tannehill. He's not off the market yet. There's not exactly a rush at this moment to sign him. I don't know when he's going to sign. Maybe it's tomorrow. Maybe it's not until, again, some quarterback does suffer a major injury. And you might say, well, they have the money. Why wouldn't they do it? Well, because any money that you don't use in the season gets carried over into next year. And that is quite the expensive insurance policy for Jordan Love to pick up at 8 to 10 million, whatever it ends up being on a 1-year deal. And again, your hope is that you never even have to use it in the first place. And like, you know, your only way of really wanting to use him, right? If Jordan goes down for the year, you're just effed. There's no coming back from effed. Ryan Tannehill, I'm sorry, is not leading this team to a Super Bowl. It's going to be hard enough for Jordan Love to lead this team to a Super Bowl. Ryan Tannehill is not doing it, nor is any other backup they can acquire at the trade deadline or at the cut down days on waivers via trade, in free agency, etc. No other quarterback is leading them to a Super Bowl if Jordan Love goes down for the year. So what you're hoping is that it's only a 4 to 6 week injury and that your backup quarterback can give you 2 to 3 wins in that stretch of games. And then you're doing a cost per win thing here, right? Is it worth it to pay Ryan Tannehill $10 million in case the one situation comes up where Love goes down from 4 to 6 weeks, and then you're paying him 8 to 10 million on a 1-year deal for just 4 to 6 games? Because if it's longer than that, you're probably just effed anyway. And you'd probably just rather have the better draft pick at that point anyway, because Tannehill's not taking you to the promised land. So there is a very narrow, pathway that Ryan Tannehill makes sense. And even in that narrow pathway where you lose Jordan for 6 games and you think Tannehill can get you to 3-3, 4-2, is it different than maybe a Sean Clifford, where if in perfect conditions, or maybe a different backup that you can get off of waivers, would they go maybe 2-4, 3-3? So is it worth one game difference, 1.5 games difference? And is that worth 9 to 10 million? Like, these are the things. And you could get Tannehill in, get him in that situation. He could go 0-6, or he could get injured right away. And then you just paid that amount of money for nothing. So these are the difficult decisions that you have to sort of make, and you have to count every dollar and, account for it and make sure that you're using it the right way. And I can understand a world in which you think that spending $10 million or $8 million, whatever it is, for 1 year on Ryan Tannehill in a really rare scenario that actually makes sense to do so, and not doing that. So listen, if you told me tomorrow that the Packers signed Ryan Tannehill 1 year, $8 million as an insurance policy for Jordan Love, would I hate it? No, I would understand it. I'd be okay with it. I think it would be a little bit exorbitant. I would think that there was probably better ways to spend that $8 million, but I wouldn't hate it. But I can absolutely understand why maybe they would not want to do that, knowing where, again, there's a very narrow scenario in which that would actually make sense to do. So that's where I think it's at. Arnoldo Hyandi, what did you learn in terms of team mentality after the loss to the Broncos? What player do you see differently after a game like that? Team mentality, we will learn more against the Ravens this week than we will learn against the Broncos. I want to see how they respond this week against the Ravens. What happened with the Broncos happened. It was sort of a team crapping of the bed, not any individual one player. Now I want to see how the team responds this week and who leads this team and has them step up through the course of the week. So I think we'll learn a lot more in the aftermath than we did in the moment. Don't know that there's necessarily a player that I see drastically different. I do think Christian Welch definitely helped himself a lot in that performance, though. Got to be cheap. Any backup quarterback reality is a backup is good for only a 3 to 4 game stretch. If Love goes down any longer, the dream is over on to next season. Yep, we just talked about it. Starting to really wonder if LVN is ever going to develop. These are like the situations where, like, let's not reach for extremes. I saw LVN have some good plays in camp and had a nice first preseason game, and everyone wanted to jump to, here we go, year 2 jump, big time playmaker. LVN's going to have a massive season. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. He still has a long ways to go. And then you see a game like this where he can't get off of blocks at all and he struggles to make anything. And everyone wants to immediately go in the opposite direction and say, what a bum, what a waste of a first round pick. He's never going to develop. Whoa, whoa, whoa. There's a lot of upside still there. Different players click at different times. We should all remember Devontae Adams, Jordan Love, Donald Driver, Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre. Like, a lot of these guys were not ready-made. Rashawn Gary. Like, if any team and any of their fans should know that players develop at different times, it should be Packers fans. It takes some of these guys 2 years, 3 years, 4 years before things click sometimes. LVN was always a project. He always had the elite measurables. He's got great hustle and motor. He needs a pass rush plan. He needs to probably be a little bit more bendable and pliable. I don't know that that's ever going to come, but there's a lot to work with there. Is he there yet? Hell no. Not close to a finished product. Do I think he can still be a really solid rotational defensive end for this team this year? I do. But I don't think it's going to be breakout year 2 LVN. I don't think it's going to be bust season LVN. I think there's a progression to this. I think he's probably slightly behind at the moment. I wish he was a little bit more ahead in year 2 right now than where he is. But I'm certainly not giving up on him. And I still think there's at least, at minimum, a solid rotational player there. So I try not to live on either end of the extreme. What didn't look good was the Packers run D. Are you talking about in preseason? Either way, not super concerned again with no starters out there. LVN will get there. Understand that sentiment. D is already almost set in stone. It's the offense with questions mostly. Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think, again, some of the backup spots on defense, I think defensive end, defensive tackle for the most part feel pretty set. Maybe they keep a Cox or a Mosby. Off-ball linebacker, does Christian Welch make it? He's probably right around that cutoff. Corner, Rochelle, Ballantyne, Kalen King, 3 guys fighting for 2 spots. Backup safety, can Zane Anderson make it as a 6th? I think those are probably the questions that remain right now. But for the most part, I would say offenses and special teams have a few more questions. How are joint practices run in comparison to a typical training camp practice? Not all that different. It's just you have 2 different ends of the field where there's a butt ton of stuff going on. So you've got, Ravens offense versus Packers defense down there, and then Ravens defense versus Packers offense down there. And there's just a ton going on. So it's just almost like there's 2 practices going on instead of 1, but it's a lot of the same stuff, a lot of the same concepts, a lot of the same drills, a lot of the same teamwork. All that stuff kind of remains the same. It feels like there's 2 practices going on simultaneously. All right, Omer, I guess we can expect same scenarios last week, the first to play in the joint practice and the rest during the actual game versus the Ravens. I think it will be dependent upon how they practice against the Ravens. I think if they have a great practice against the Ravens, I don't think we'll see the starters against Baltimore. I think if they struggle and it's another week like they had against the Broncos in joint practices, I think you will see some of the starters in that preseason game, similar to what we saw in week 1 of preseason. Nick, thank you so much for the super chat. Hope you're doing well, bud. Go Pack Go. Appreciate that a ton. And thanks so much again for the super chat and all the support, Nick. I really appreciate it. Did Jordan Love? Oh, we went over that. Judy, why not trade a lower tier wide receiver for linebacker help or offensive line? I mean, it takes 2 to tango, right? As I mentioned, I don't know that there's going to be a huge market for, Malik Heath or a Grant Dubose. Again, nobody's trading away their offensive line depth. And I think Green Bay probably feels mostly comfortable with their linebacker position, and their big additions there are going to be Hopper and Cooper. They just need to get them up to speed. So again, it takes 2 teams to make a trade. Could they make one? Sure. There's always possibilities. Goody's done a pretty good job. Usually though, it's him trading depth for future 7th round picks or future 6th round picks. And if you can pull a couple of those off, that would be awesome. What defensive end pairings would you like to see for certain situations? Gary Smith and plus LVN and Igbari. This is something I always wish they did a little bit different, because it always seems that it's Gary and Smith that are then out at the same time, and then LVN and Igbari are in at the same time. I don't necessarily hate it. I would kind of like to see a little bit more of LVN and Preston together, because I think LVN is kind of like Rashawn Gary light. So I think you have LVN and Gary on 2 separate lines, but I would kind of like to see LVN and then Preston Smith and then Rashawn Gary and Igbari a little bit more to kind of separate those. And then in some obvious passing situations, get your 2 best pass rushers on the field, whoever you feel that is. But I do wish they would stagger that a little bit more. I need to get Luigi's Pizza available from my pick and save. Yes, I think they are primarily Woodman's. and Festival Foods. So if you're looking for them, check those 2 locations if you're in one of their areas. And those are the 2 grocers I think they work with the most. Interesting, that would be 10 offensive line. If so, I do think there's a good chance that they keep 10 offensive linemen. Might cost Sims or Cox their job. If so, Cox maybe. I think Sims makes it. I'd be pretty surprised if Sims doesn't make it. Which linebackers do you think make the 53? I mean, they have clearly 5, right? I do think Wilson makes it. I think McDuffie clearly makes it. Quay makes it. Hopper and Cooper, unless Cooper starts on IR. But those 5 are clear. And then it just becomes a discussion: does Christian Welch make it or not? And he's right around that bubble, either just on or just off. But he's extremely close. He's at a great training camp in preseason. I kind of want to see him kept, but he's very close. So coin flip it one way or the other on Christian Welch. I think everyone else is pretty self-explanatory. Dan, at least this game might have been an indicator that AJ isn't on the chopping block. I did hear that he was having some trouble with the altitude. So that could have been the reason he was kept out and not the fact that he's safe. We'll see this week. It still seems like he's going to make the team. Don't get me wrong. But my initial feel was like, well, if they're not playing him, clearly he's a lock. But it did sound like maybe there was a little bit of altitude sickness going on, which could have been the reason that he did not play. Thank you, sir, for the feedback. Much appreciated. As always, Andy, Omar, you are more than welcome. John, thanks, and welcome to the chat. Matt LaFleur's teams have a reputation of being soft, and that narrative seems to have popped up again, even by Matt's admission. What does he need to do to change the reputation? Yeah, I think I will say finesse more than soft. I don't think he has a soft team. And I think, it's interesting where some of this stuff can kind of pop up one way or the other. I look at the outside at the wide receivers and how these wide receivers are blocking, and that is not soft at all. That is good, physical, aggressive blocking by the wide receivers. That's not an indicator of a soft team. I do think they are a little bit more of a finesse team. I do think they're trying to remake their image on defense of being a more aggressive, violent sort of team. We'll see how that transition goes this year. And I do think part of their offensive line, struggles, or why they maybe aren't the most dominant physically opposing offensive line, is because they have valued versatility and movement skills more than maulers. And there's 2 ways to go about it. You see some of these maulers, right? You see some of the bigger guys like Glover and Telfort and Caleb Jones. Not that they spent like premium draft capital on these guys, but they're slower, fleet of foot, and they're going to be worse in pass pro, but they can move guys a little bit more. So which one do you want? It's like everyone would love to have 5 offensive linemen that can maul and can pass protect with great footwork. Finding those guys is extremely hard. So I don't think it's a soft team. I do think it's a little bit more of a finesse team. I think their Super Bowl win in 2010 was a finesse team for the most part. I think you can win that way. I just think you have to accentuate your strengths and minimize your weaknesses. But I don't think they're soft. I think they're just maybe a little bit more finesse. And I'm hoping they get a little bit more violent on special teams and defense this year. All right, where do we go? Omer, Cox Jr. and Sims and/or Davis would likely be game day scratches most weeks. So what matters most is that they make it back to the practice squad if they are cut. I would argue that for almost anyone that's on that cut line. Let's see. DeRai guy and the GOAT debate, Rodgers or Brady? Brady. No, I'm sorry, it's Brady. Now I will separate this though. Although my argument for a while was the greatest thrower of the football ever and like the best quarterback in their prime, I thought, was Aaron Rodgers. Like if you just had it, like if you could have one quarterback that was like peak prime of their career, could do everything, I thought it was Aaron. But best over their career, longevity, greatest of all time, to me, it is very clearly Brady. But Mahomes might challenge both of those things. I would probably put Mahomes over Rodgers now as the greatest pure like thrower of the football, best quarterback in their prime. And at one given moment, I would probably go Mahomes. And then probably Rodgers is 2. And then the greatest of all time very much may end up being Mahomes over Brady as well. But he's got a few more Super Bowls to win. And the longevity is really, really tough to beat for Tom. But I would put Tom over Aaron at this point. Yes, practice squad depth works. He's gets back there. Jennings, yes, that'd be nice. Richard, is this the year that an undrafted player won't make the team and break the undrafted streak? I think so. I can't really find one, right? I don't even know of anyone that's even like remotely in the conversation at this point. I think Donovan Jennings is probably going to be the best bet. No Messiah Swinson, no Jarvion Howard, no Donovan Jennings, no Dimitri Stanley, no Julian Hicks, no James Esther, no Raylan Goforth, no Chris Russell, no Alex Hale. I guess Alex Hale might be like the best bet at this time, and I don't see that happening. So unless Alex Hale makes a really unbelievable stretch of kicks to end camp and somehow earns the job, yeah, I can't see an undrafted free agent making it at this point. Hot beef from Kroll's, Chef's Kiss. I've never had the hot beef from Kroll's, Rob. I might have to try that out sometime. Late to the game here, so apologies if redundant. Who are the top 2 to 3 surprises to make the roster? Any by default, the top 2 to 3 surprise cuts. I just went over a locks and a surprise cuts episode last week, so I'd recommend checking that out. We've talked a lot about 53-man roster. I don't know that I have like a super surprise to make the team or any like crazy cuts. I think go back and listen to the beginning of this, and I kind of talked about for a while how who are you going to lose sleep over if they lose them? And I think any of these guys that we're talking about from a roster cut standpoint, outside Kalen King, Michael Pratt, Travis Glover, some of those guys that I would want to keep on the team because I think there's enough upside there. Any of the other guys they could probably lose, and I'm going to be fine with it because I think that they are the difference between them and guys that you can claim off of waivers, find off of a practice squad, etc. I think is just extremely, extremely minimum. So I don't think we have to lose too much sleep or have too much concern over maybe losing some of those guys. Chad, I noticed that Bullard especially, but Williams as well, didn't have a good night in Denver. Was it an off night for those two, or does McKinney make that big of a difference for those two when he's on the field? Bullard didn't have any opportunities. He was in the slot. He went out of the game early. I didn't think there was anything he did bad. I just didn't think he had any opportunities to do anything good or bad. And then Williams, I thought there were a couple plays he'd like to have back, but I loved the way that he was playing. I loved his intensity. Probably came up a little bit early on that play, probably a little bit before the quarterback passed the line of scrimmage. Probably needs to stay back with the running back on the play that was ultimately called back, but nothing egregious from Williams. And I didn't think Bullard had a bad night, a good night. He just, again, wasn't challenged. There wasn't any opportunity for him. The UFA streak ends this year, none making this 53. Yep, just talked about that and totally agree. I like DTR as a backup. DTR, why am I drawing a blank? Who's DTR? Why am I not putting this abbreviation together? I'm like going through the entire roster. Who's DTR? You're messing with me at this point. Are they just like wrong initials? All right, help me out. Somebody help me out. I'm gonna probably just be an idiot here. Dorian Thompson Robinson. Okay, I thought you meant somebody on the team. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other about Dorian Thompson Robinson. Heineke is cheap. I take him. I would agree with that. Although the Pack looked horrible versus the Broncos, I'm still confident in this offense, but that defense had a very rough week. I sure hope that D is a lot better. This D in practice and especially in the game was super vanilla, Omer. This is nothing like that defense will look. I'm not saying that they're going to be successful or that they're going to fail, but that defense was extremely vanilla, extremely, extremely vanilla. What do you think of Caleb Williams so far in camp and preseason? Exactly as expected. His off-platform stuff, his ability to ad-lib, his arm is unreal. All that stuff's amazing. His ability to play in pocket, still going to be a work in progress. So he can hit all the home runs. He just needs to hit some singles and get some walks and get on base a little bit more, hit the easy stuff. But, he right now is, who is that? He's like Russell Branyan for the Brewers, or there's why can't I think of his name? He played for Texas. He was just a home run hitter. He couldn't hit for average at all. Oh, that's going to bother me. But he's just like that. Right now, he's kind of that, right? Where it's just, he might hit, 198 on the year, but hit like 45 home runs. But he's going to develop into a pocket passer too. I don't think there's any question about that. All of the talent is there. He's been exactly as advertised so far. Like I said, just needs to play a little bit more in the pocket, take a few more of the singles. He will over time, but I'd be shocked if he doesn't end up being a pretty significant stud for the Bears. One game is one game. He will look better in the rotation. Forgot who we're talking about there, but I'm sure you were right, Michael. You've already broken down replacement QBs and kickers, but is there anyone else anywhere out there that might be an affordable backup while Pratt develops, or for the kicking room? No, I think we've talked about a lot of those guys already. I don't think there's anyone else that we haven't talked about that is, in one of those conversations at kicker. I don't know if you mean at like a different position, but no, kicker and quarterback, we've went through all those guys already. The biggest losers from this past game were the Broncos broadcast team and their graphics team. Thankfully, I got the local broadcast, so I didn't have to deal with that, but I did hear a lot of complaints about it. Thanks, Andy, for all you do. Us diehard Green Bay Packer fans, you are more than welcome, Kevin. Derek, Copper State Brewing, damn good food, great beer, great stuff. Andy, I think you've covered nearly everything there is to cover. Goodness. I haven't been to Copper State for food in a while. I've there for drinks more recently, but it's been a while since I've had food there. So I might have to try that again soon. Let's see. Why has it become a foregone conclusion that Jordan Morgan has surpassed Sean Ryan on the depth chart? Is it just that he is much further ahead as a pass blocker? Sean seems to be doing well in the run game. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion at all, Brian. I think it was very much trending in that direction that Morgan was going to be the starter at right guard. But I think with him being out and not playing right now, I think Sean Ryan is absolutely in that discussion. And unless Morgan gets back this week, I don't know that Morgan just all of a sudden goes in and starts ahead of him week one. I could see one of two things. I could see Sean Ryan being the guy to begin with, and they ramp Jordan Morgan up. And once he's ready and they feel he's more comfortable, maybe they could replace Ryan at that time, or if Ryan struggles. Or I could also see a very similar situation to the Sean Ryan, John Runyon Jr. rotation last year, where Sean Ryan's the starter in this case, whereas it was Runyon last year, and Jordan Morgan plays 20 to 25 snaps a game so that they get him those reps. They did something similar with Lane Taylor and Elton Jenkins to begin with when Jenkins was first starting out. So I could absolutely see a rotation there, and I could absolutely see a world in which Sean Ryan's just the starter too. But right now it's just paramount that Morgan gets back in team drills and starts practicing again so that Green Bay can have a better feel for who they want to start at right guard. Let's see. Ryan looks very good, like he's progressed from last season to being much more solid in his play. I think he's looked solid. I don't think he's looked spectacular, but I think he's been solid, more consistent. And I think that's one of the biggest things that everyone's been asking for Sean Ryan, is just a little bit more consistency. Tough to say on Cooper. We'll have to find out a little bit more this week. And if he can get back practicing this week, hopefully he can, but there's been no update on him whatsoever. In a points per reception league, which Packers receiver would you pick? I will still go with Jaden Reed. I would just stay away from Packers receivers, by the way. I think they're just going to steal from each other way too often, but I'll go Jaden Reed. I still think he's the guy that they sort of scheme stuff up for and is kind of constantly in the slot, and not always, but more often than not, he has the most defined role. And he had a really nice rookie year. I think he'll expand upon that this year, but I would stay away from Packers wide receivers. That's just my opinion, because I think it'll be somebody different week in and week out. All right, friends, I think we got to just about everything. I did skip a few of Omer's at the end there, since I think we got to about 30 Omer questions. But outside of that, I think we got to everyone's. And Omer, still appreciate you a ton, buddy. I will see you guys at happy hour on Friday. Remember, Thursday night this week, I will be doing a live get-together, 6 p.m. at the distillery. So if you want to come out, grab a couple drinks, it's not going to be anything formal, not a Q&A, just hanging out, chatting Packers with anyone who wants to come and chat. So 6 p.m. probably to 8 p.m.-ish over at Green Bay Distillery. I'm going to drink some old fashions, talk Packers. Should be a fun time. Hope to see some of you guys there. But yeah, otherwise I'll be at practice in just a little bit. Watch out for those tweets. Don't think I'm going to be able to do a quick hits episode today because of how late the practice is. I got to get my kids to football practice and a couple other things, but we'll do the full breakdown for you guys tomorrow. That's going to do it for me for now. You guys are the absolute best. I'll talk to you soon, but until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.